Oh, welcome to the Book of Days Project. It is February 23rd, and we continue on undaunted as we attempt to read selections from Chambers' Book of Days every day of this calendar year 2009. February 23rd, born on this day, the famous diarist Samuel Pepys, and he was also Secretary of the Admiralty, dead in 1632. He was born on that day. Died on this day, Sir Thomas Wyatt, beheaded. Another head which rolled on the floor of the Tower. In 1555, Stanislaus I of Poland died in 1766. Sir Joshua Reynolds, landscape painter. Landscape painter? Painter in 1792, died in Leicester Square. It is the feast day of Saint Serenus, a gardener, martyr. In 307, gardener, martyr, not a bad combination of professions. Saint Boisil, prior of Melross in 644, is that man's feast day. Saint Milburge, a virgin abbessess in Shropshire, 7th century. Today marks her feast day. The death of Sir Joshua Reynolds. Let's get some clarification quickly. For some time previous to his decease, this great painter felt that his end was approaching. Premonition. The failure of his powers is touchingly recorded. In July 1789, when Sir Joshua had nearly finished the portraitist of Lady Beauchamp, the last female portrait he ever painted, his eyesight was so affected that he found it difficult to proceed. He laid down his pencil and sat a while in mute consideration. In his pocketbook is this note of the calamity. Monday, the 13th of July. Prevented by my eye beginning to be obscured. He soon totally lost it, and then violently apprehended that the other was going to. This was not the case, but the dread of what might happen if he used the other eye, too much, entirely deterred him from either painting, writing, or reading. He amused himself by sometimes cleaning or mending a picture, for his ruling passion still continued in force, and he enjoyed his pictures as much as ever. His health was perfect, and his spirits were good. He enjoyed company in a quiet way, and loved a game of cards as well as ever. Sir Joshua's niece, Miss Palmer, speaks in March 1790 of his still painting. Another authority dates his entire cessation from work in November 1791. Sir Joshua now became much depressed in spirits. A tumor and inflammation above the eye that had perished could not be dispersed, and he dreaded that the other eye might be affected. He grew melancholy and sorrowfully silent. Concealed malady was sapping his life and spirits. Mr. Burke tells us that the great painter's illness was long, but borne with a mild and cheerful fortitude, without the least mixture of anything irritable or querulous, agreeable to the placid and even tenor of his whole life. He had from the beginning of his malady a distinct view of his dissolution, which he contemplated with an entire composure, that nothing but the innocence, integrity, and usefulness of his life, and an unaffected submission to the will of Providence, could bestow. I have been fortunate, said Reynolds, in long good health and constant success. I not to complain. I know that all things on earth must have an end. With these simple words of resignation, Sir Joshua expired without any visible symptoms of pain at his home in Leicester Square on the night of February 23rd, 1792, in the 69th year of his age. Fascinating to accept one's death with equanimity. A great accomplishment. Let's move on to things also mentioned on this day by Chambers. He mentions scent balls and pomanders. Among the minor objects of personal use, which appear from an inventory to belong to Margaret de Beauhamp, daughter of Humphrey de Beauhamp, Earl of Hereford in Essex, slain at the Battle of Boroughbridge, March 16, 1321, is a pomme d'ambre, or a scent ball, in the composition of which ambergris probably formed a principal ingredient. We learn also that a nutmeg was occasionally used for the like purpose. It was set in silver, decorated with stones and pearls, and was evidently an object rare and highly prized. Amongst the valuable effects of Henry V, according to the inventory taken in A.D. 1423, are enumerated a musk ball of gold weighing 11 ounces and another of silver gilt. At a later period, the pomander was very commonly worn as the pendant of a lady's girdle. The orange appears to have been used as a pomander soon after its introduction into England. Cavendish describes Cardinal Wolsey entering a crowded chamber, holding in his hand a very fair orange, whereof the meat or substance within was taken out and filled up again with the part of a sponge, wherein was vinegar and other confections against the pestilent airs, the which he must commonly smelt into his pomander, passing among the press, or else he was pestered with many suitors. Fascinating. Sir Thomas Gresham, in his celebrated portrait by Sir Antonio Moore, holds in his left hand a small object resembling an orange, but which is a pomander. This sometimes consisted of a dried Seville orange stuffed with cloves and other spices, and being esteemed a fashionable preservative against infection. It frequently occurs in old portraits. Look for them. Either suspended to the girdle or held in the hand. In the 18th century, the signification of this object had become so far forgotten that instead of pomanders, bona fide oranges were introduced into portraits, a practice which Goldsmith happily satirized in his Vicar of Wakefield, where 7 of the flambeaux are drawn with 7 oranges. When the pomander was made of silver, it was perforated with holes to let out the scent. Hence the origin of the vinaigrettes of our day. Let us now speak of Mr. Fox, an old English nursery story. In Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, Benedict alludes to the old tale, "It is not so, nor 'twas not so, but indeed, God forbid, it should be so." It is believed by his laborious commentator, Mr. Hallowell, that Shakespeare here had in his recollection a simple English nursery story which he had probably heard in his infancy at Stratford, and of which some memory still survives. The story is given by the learned commentator as follows. Once upon a time there was a young lady called Lady Mary, who had 2 brothers. One summer they all went to a country seat of theirs, which they had not before visited. Among the older gentry in the neighborhood who came to see them was a Mr. Fox, a neighbor, a bachelor, with whom they, particularly the young lady, were much pleased. He used often to dine with them, and frequently invited Lady Mary to come and see his house. One day that her brothers were absent elsewhere, and she had nothing better to do, she determined to go thither, and according set out unattended. When she arrived at the house and knocked at the door, no one answered. At length she opened it and went in. Over the portal of the hall was written, be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold." She opened it. It was full of skeletons and tubs full of blood. She retreated in haste, and coming downstairs she saw Mr. Fox advancing towards the house with a drawn sword in one hand, while the other he dragged along a young lady by her hair. Lady Mary had just time to slip down and hide herself under the stairs before Mr. Fox and his victim arrived at the foot of them. As he pulled the young lady upstairs, she caught hold of one of the banisters with her hand, on which was a rich bracelet. Mr. Fox cut it off with his sword. The hand and bracelets fell into Lady Mary's lap, who then contrived to escape unobserved and got home safe to her brother's house. After a few days, Mr. Fox came to dine with them as usual. After dinner, when the guests began to amuse each other with extraordinary anecdotes, Lady Mary at length said she would relate to them a remarkable dream she had lately had. "I dreamt," she said, "that as you, Mr. Fox, had often invited me to go to your house, I would go there one morning. When I came to the house, I knocked, but no one answered. When I opened the door, over the hall was written, be bold, but not too bold. But said she, turning to Mr. Fox and smiling, it is not so, nor it was not so." Then she pursued the rest of the story, concluding at every turn with, it is not so, nor it was not so. Or, excuse me, it is not so, nor it was not so. Till she came to the room full of dead bodies, when Mr. Fox took up the burden of the tale and said, "It is not so, nor it was not so, and God forbid it should be so," which he continues to repeat at every subsequent turn of the dreadful story, till she came to the circumstance of the cutting off of the young lady's hand, when upon his saying as usual, "It is not so, nor it was not so, and God forbid it should be so," Lady Mary retorts, "But it is so, and it was so, and here's the hand I have to show," at the same time producing the bracelet from her lap, whereupon the guests drew their swords and cut Mr. Fox into 1,000 pieces. Some nursery tale, after all. Thank you for joining us for the Book of Days. We will see you soon, meaning tomorrow.